It was a typical Friday evening in the small town, and the diner was busier than usual. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the aroma of fried food, creating a warm, welcoming environment. Lila, a young waitress in her mid-20s, moved between tables with a practiced ease. She had worked at this diner for over 3 years, and most of the regular customers knew her by name. She smiled at everyone she served, always polite, always calm, even when the workload was overwhelming. Tonight, however, something felt different. There was a strange tension in the air, almost like the calm before a storm. The door to the diner swung open with a loud bang, and immediately, the atmosphere shifted. A group of bikers walked in, their leather jackets creaking as they moved. Their motorcycles were parked outside, engines still running, sending small vibrations through the diner walls. The sound of heavy boots on the tiled floor drew the attention of everyone in the room. Lila felt a small knot of worry in her stomach. She had seen bikers before, some friendly, some rough, but there was something intimidating about the way this group carried themselves. They didn't greet anyone. Instead, they headed straight for the biggest table, taking over half the space. One of them, a tall man with tattoos covering his arms and neck, slammed a fist on the table, startling the nearby customers. He had a harsh look in his eyes, and his voice carried an edge that made Lila instinctively step closer to the other waitstaff. She tried to keep her calm, reminding herself not to judge people by how they looked. After all, everyone deserved to be treated with respect. She approached the table cautiously, not wanting to provoke them but needing to take their orders. "Good evening," she said with a friendly tone, trying to mask the slight tremor in her voice. "Can I get you anything to drink?" The tall biker looked up at her, his eyes narrowing. "We'll take beers." "Make it quick," he said gruffly, not even bothering to smile. His friends laughed loudly, slapping each other on the back, and the sound echoed through the diner. The volume was almost painful, and some customers looked around nervously, unsure whether to leave or stay. Lila nodded and turned to the counter to grab the drinks. As she did, she couldn't help but notice how the other bikers were watching the diners. Their eyes scanned the room like predators, making people feel uncomfortable. Lila's heart raced. She had handled difficult customers before, but there was something about this group that felt unpredictable. She reminded herself to stay professional and focused on her work. When she returned to the table with the beers, she set them down carefully. "Here you go. Is there anything else I can get for you?" she asked politely. The tall biker slammed his hand on the table again, spilling some of the beer. "You need to be faster," he said harshly, his voice louder this time. A few customers flinched. Lila's stomach twisted. She wanted to say something, to stand up for herself, but she knew that arguing could make things worse. Instead, she kept her tone calm and steady. "I'm sorry about that. I'll be more careful," she said softly, trying not to show her fear. The biker laughed, a deep, loud sound that made the windows rattle slightly. "Careful? We don't have time for careful. Just do your job, girl," he said, leaning back in his chair and smirking. His friends joined in the laughter, making it clear that they thought they were in charge here. Lila's hand shook slightly as she turned away to take the empty glasses back to the counter. She thought about asking the diner manager for help, but he was busy dealing with the kitchen, trying to keep up with the sudden rush of customers. Lila had no choice but to handle the situation on her own, at least for now. She took a deep breath, reminding herself to stay calm. She had been through stressful shifts before, but this felt different. There was a sense of danger in the air that she couldn't ignore. As she moved around the diner, clearing tables and taking orders from other customers, she noticed that the tall biker was becoming more aggressive. He started knocking over chairs, not in a playful way, but deliberately, just to show that he could. Some of the younger customers shrank back in fear, whispering to their friends. Lila felt a surge of protectiveness. She couldn't just stand by and let someone be threatened in her workplace. Finally, she mustered the courage to approach the table again. "Sir, please, you're disturbing the other customers." "I need you to calm down," she said, trying to keep her voice firm but polite. The biker's eyes flared with anger. "Who are you to tell me what to do?" he shouted. His voice echoed across the diner. Some of the customers gasped, and a few of the bikers leaned forward, ready to escalate the situation. Lila's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood her ground. "I'm just asking you to respect everyone here," she said, her voice shaking slightly but holding firm. The biker laughed mockingly and grabbed a tray from the counter, knocking over a few plates as he did. "Respect? You don't know me, girl. You better watch yourself," he said, his tone menacing. Lila felt panic rising. She knew she needed help, but the manager was still tied up in the kitchen. She glanced around the diner, looking for anyone who could step in. The customers were frozen, some clutching their drinks, others quietly dialing their phones. Just as the situation seemed about to spiral out of control, the door opened again. This time, the entrance didn't bring tension but a sudden shift in energy. People turned their heads and the bikers themselves paused, their aggressive postures faltering. A tall, broad man walked in with a calm, confident stride. His presence was immediately noticeable. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten, but somehow, just standing there, he changed the mood of the entire diner. It was John Cena, in town for a charity event, completely unaware that he was about to walk into a tense situation. He noticed the commotion instantly, seeing the biker threatening Lila and the fear on the faces of the diners. Cena's experience dealing with aggressive crowds and tense situations gave him the instinct to act quickly, but calmly. He didn't panic. He didn't rush. He simply moved toward the table, his eyes steady, his posture firm. The tall biker, noticing Cena approach, initially smirked, thinking he could intimidate anyone who came close. But as Cena drew nearer, something in his calm, unwavering gaze caused the biker to pause. The other bikers shifted uncomfortably, sensing that this man was not like anyone they had faced before. Cena didn't say a word yet. He just positioned himself between Lila and the threatening biker, creating a barrier without raising his voice, without making a sudden move that could escalate the situation further. Lila watched in disbelief, her fear mixing with a sudden surge of hope. Here was a man she didn't know, yet he was stepping in to protect her. She felt a strange sense of relief, knowing she was no longer alone in facing this aggression. The tension in the diner was palpable, but Cena's calmness seemed to make it manageable. For a moment, the biker and Cena simply stared at each other. The biker's bravado began to fade under Cena's steady gaze. Cena spoke, but not loudly. His voice was calm, firm, and full of authority. "Step back, calm down. This isn't worth hurting anyone," he said. There was no shouting, no threat, just a clear and unwavering command that demanded attention. The biker's friends glanced at him nervously, unsure how to react. The biker himself hesitated, caught between his own anger and the authority emanating from Cena. Lila felt a small wave of courage herself. Seeing someone step in like this reminded her that help could come when it was most needed. As Cena continued to stand there, the diner began to breathe again. Customers relaxed slightly, though the tension hadn't completely disappeared. The story of that night had already begun to form in everyone's minds, a story of courage, intervention, and the unexpected arrival of someone willing to stand up for what was right. Lila's heart slowly began to calm, and she realized that sometimes, even in the most frightening moments, there was hope. The hope that someone would step in, the hope that violence could be stopped before it started, and the hope that courage could come from the most unexpected places. And at that moment, as Cena positioned himself between her and the biker, the entire diner seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The diner was silent for a few tense moments as John Cena stood between Lila and the aggressive biker. The air felt heavy, thick with anticipation, like everyone was waiting for something to happen. Lila's hands were trembling slightly and her mind raced with thoughts of what could go wrong. She had never seen anyone confront someone so dangerous with such calm and confidence. The biker, on the other hand, seemed confused at first. He had expected fear, not resistance, and certainly not someone standing so calmly in his way. Cena's presence alone seemed to change the atmosphere. The other bikers, who had been laughing and jeering a moment before, now looked uncertain. They exchanged glances as if silently questioning whether this confrontation was worth the trouble. Cena didn't make any sudden moves. He simply planted his feet firmly on the floor and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "You don't need to do this," he said. "No one here wants trouble, and hurting someone isn't going to solve anything." The biker barked out a laugh, trying to mask his own unease. "Who are you to tell me what to do?" he shouted, leaning forward, slightly as if trying to intimidate Cena. But Cena didn't flinch. Instead, he looked the biker directly in the eyes, his expression calm but firm. "I'm someone who knows that hurting others doesn't make you stronger," Cena replied. "It only makes you weaker. Step back and let this end peacefully." For a moment, there was a tense standoff. The biker's face was red with anger, and he was clearly struggling with his own pride. He wanted to assert dominance to make it clear that he was in control, but Cena's unwavering stance and calm voice made him hesitate. The other bikers started shifting in their seats, sensing that their friend's aggression might soon backfire. Some of them whispered among themselves, their voices low, clearly unsure of what to do next. Lila watched with a mix of fear and awe. She could hardly believe that a famous wrestler had just walked into her diner and was now acting as her protector. Her mind raced, trying to remember every safety tip she had ever been given. Stay calm, don't escalate. Protect yourself. But watching Cena, she realized that sometimes courage came in unexpected ways, and sometimes it required no weapon at all, just presence, confidence, and the will to act. The biker took a step toward Lila, clearly testing the limits. Cena immediately positioned himself slightly in front of her, not aggressively but in a protective stance. He didn't touch the biker yet. He simply created a barrier. Back off, Cena said, his voice firm but not angry. This ends now, the biker sneered, thinking Cena was bluffing. Or what? He shouted. You'll stop me? He took another step forward, trying to make Lila flinch. But Cena didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the biker, unwavering, showing a confidence that made the aggressor pause. The diner felt like it had frozen in time. Customers held their breath, unsure whether a fight was about to break out. Some quietly dialed emergency numbers on their phones, while others clutched their drinks, bracing for the worst. Lila felt her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to cry out, to beg for the biker to stop, but something in Cena's calm presence made her feel she didn't have to. He was handling it, and she could trust him. Cena spoke again, his voice low but commanding. You have a choice here. You can walk away or you can make this worse for yourself, but hurting someone won't make you stronger, and it won't solve anything. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply stated the truth in a way that cut through the biker's bravado. For the first time, the biker hesitated. He looked around the diner, seeing the fearful faces of the customers, the protective stance of Cena, and the helplessness of the waitress he had targeted. The anger in his eyes wavered. His friends were still there, but they no longer looked confident. The energy in the room had shifted entirely. Cena had taken control, not through aggression, but through presence and calm authority. Still, the biker wasn't ready to admit defeat. He lunged toward Lila again, this time trying to grab a tray from her hands. Cena moved swiftly, intercepting the biker's motion with a controlled, precise maneuver. He didn't strike the biker. He simply used his body to block the attack and guide him away from Lila. The move was quick, efficient, and completely nonviolent, but it made the biker stumble slightly, enough to stop his aggression in its tracks. The other bikers were stunned. They had never seen anyone handle their friend with such ease, and the realization began to sink in that this confrontation was not going the way they expected. Cena didn't release his hold entirely, maintaining a careful balance that ensured the biker couldn't hurt anyone, but also didn't feel unnecessarily humiliated. It was a delicate balance, one that required both strength and empathy. Cena's voice cut through the tension again. Look at yourself. This isn't who you are, and it's not who you want to be. Walk away, and you can still choose to do the right thing. He didn't yell, but his words carried weight. The biker's face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment. He was used to being in control, used to intimidating others, and now he faced someone who refused to be intimidated. The biker finally took a small step back, glancing at his friends. They were silent now, unsure whether to support him or follow Cena's lead. Cena took advantage of the pause, keeping his tone calm but firm. You can still leave without making things worse. It's your choice, he said. The words weren't empty. They carried a truth that the biker couldn't ignore. Lila felt a sense of relief, though her heart was still racing. She realized that the danger was not over, but at least the immediate threat had been controlled. Cena's presence had prevented a situation that could have ended badly, and she was grateful beyond words. She also noticed how he never once raised his voice to shout, never once struck the biker. His authority came from confidence, experience, and the ability to stay calm under pressure. The diner slowly began to exhale. Some customers whispered quietly to each other, still cautious but visibly relieved that a confrontation had been avoided. Lila took a deep breath, realizing that she had witnessed something remarkable. This was not just about stopping a single aggressive customer. It was about showing that courage and calmness could make a real difference in the world. Cena continued to speak to the biker, keeping him engaged in conversation rather than allowing the anger to flare up again. He asked questions in a neutral tone, encouraging the biker to reflect rather than react. "Why are you doing this?" Cena asked. "What's making you act like this tonight?" The biker muttered something unintelligible, clearly not used to being questioned in this way. Cena didn't push. He simply waited, giving him space to think while maintaining control of the situation. Finally, the biker's shoulders slumped slightly. The fight in him was fading, replaced by a reluctant awareness of what he had done. Cena took another small step back, giving him room to step away if he chose. The biker glanced at his friends, then at Cena, and something shifted in his demeanor. He muttered a low curse, grabbed his jacket, and walked toward the door. The other bikers followed silently, leaving the diner without another word. Lila's hands trembled as she watched them leave. The tension in the room slowly melted away, replaced by a sense of awe and relief. She turned to Cena, wanting to thank him, but words failed her. He simply smiled, nodding gently, acknowledging her gratitude without making a show of it. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his tone filled with genuine concern. Lila nodded, tears threatening to fall, still in disbelief at what had just happened. The manager finally emerged from the kitchen, looking around in confusion. "What happened?" he asked, seeing the aftermath of the chaos. Cena explained briefly, making sure Lila felt supported and safe. The manager quickly moved to reassure the customers, but everyone's attention remained on Cena, who had single-handedly prevented a dangerous situation without a single act of violence. That night, Lila realized something important. Courage didn't always come from fists or force. Sometimes it came from calmness, presence, and the willingness to stand up for what was right. Cena had not only protected her, but had also shown everyone in the diner that even in frightening moments, one person could make a real difference. And as she watched Cena quietly leave after making sure she and the customers were safe, Lila knew that the story of that night would stay with her forever. A story of bravery, intervention, and the unexpected hero who walked through the door and changed everything. After the initial tension in the diner had eased slightly, the atmosphere remained thick with unease. The biker was still seated at his table, shifting uncomfortably under John Cena's watchful gaze. Although he had backed off from directly threatening Lila, there was a simmering frustration in his eyes. He had not expected anyone to confront him with such calm authority, and it clearly rattled him. The other bikers, once loud and boastful, were now unusually quiet. They were watching Cena carefully, unsure of what would happen next. Cena remained calm, his movements deliberate but relaxed. He didn't want to escalate the situation further. Instead, he focused on de-escalation, understanding that the bikers' anger stemmed from more than just the immediate incident. Cena had seen this many times before, people acting aggressively out of frustration, pride, or insecurity. The key was to acknowledge their emotions while preventing them from acting on them destructively. "Look," Cena began, keeping his tone steady and conversational, "I get it. Sometimes we get frustrated, angry, or feel like no one respects us, but taking it out on someone else isn't the answer. You're better than that." His words were simple, but there was a sincerity to them that made the biker hesitate. For the first time that evening, he seemed to consider what Cena was saying. Lila, standing a safe distance behind Cena, felt a mixture of relief and awe. She had witnessed countless tense situations at the diner, but nothing like this. Cena wasn't relying on his size or fame to intimidate. He was relying on presence, calmness, and understanding. Lila realized that real courage wasn't about fighting. It was about knowing how to act wisely when things got dangerous. The bikers' friends began to shift in their seats. One of them whispered something, probably telling their friend to calm down. Cena noticed this subtle change and nodded slightly. He didn't speak over the group, but he adjusted his position to ensure that Lila was always between him and the biker. The simple act of positioning himself this way was enough to signal control without creating unnecessary aggression. For a few moments, the diner was almost completely silent. The only sounds were the quiet chatter of nervous customers and the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Cena maintained eye contact with the biker, not in a threatening way, but in a way that conveyed confidence and empathy at the same time. He knew that showing respect to someone, even in a tense situation, could often break down their hostility faster than confrontation ever could. Finally, the biker muttered something under his breath. Cena leaned slightly closer, just enough to hear him without anyone else catching the words. "It's not too late," Cena said softly. "You can still do the right thing here. Nobody has to get hurt tonight." The biker hesitated, his hands clenching and unclenching on the table. He seemed to be struggling with himself, wrestling between pride and common sense. Cena didn't pressure him, didn't shout or threaten. He simply remained steady, his calm presence acting like a shield around Lila. This was the moment where the biker had to make a Schweighöner, and Cena made sure that choice was clear. The other bikers began to whisper among themselves more audibly now, their earlier bravado gone. They weren't looking for trouble anymore. They were looking for a way to leave without making things worse. Cena noticed this shift and allowed himself a small, quiet smile. The confrontation wasn't over yet, but the tide had clearly turned. Lila's mind was racing, but she tried to focus on what she could do. She quietly backed toward a corner of the diner, staying within Cena's protective shadow. She felt a strange mix of fear and admiration. Fear because the situation had escalated so quickly, and admiration because she was seeing firsthand how calmness and confidence could neutralize aggression. She realized that bravery didn't always mean fighting back. It sometimes meant standing firm and acting wisely when others were losing control. Cena spoke again, keeping his voice calm and measured. "Think about how this will look tomorrow. Think about how your friends see you. Do you want to be remembered for hurting someone weaker than you, or for walking away with your dignity intact?" His words were simple, but they struck a chord. The biker's expression shifted slightly. He was no longer just angry. He was considering the consequences of his actions. The diner staff began to regain some composure. The manager, who had been watching from the kitchen, finally stepped out to support Cena. He didn't need to say much. Cena's presence alone was enough to maintain control. He simply moved around, ensuring that no one else got too close to the tense scene, giving Cena and the biker the space they needed. One of the bikers finally spoke up, his voice uncertain. "Maybe we should just go," he muttered, glancing at his friend. The leader, the tall biker, looked around, his pride clearly hurting, but Cena didn't react with judgment. He simply nodded slightly, giving the unspoken permission that leaving was the right choice. The biker leaned back in his chair, his shoulders slumping. Cena kept a careful watch, ensuring that no sudden movements could cause another flare-up. He spoke softly, almost conversationally, trying to connect with the man on a human level. "You don't have to prove anything tonight. Just step back, walk out, and you can still do the right thing." For a few long seconds, the biker sat there silently, staring at Cena. The quiet in the diner was almost unbearable. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what he would do. Then slowly he nodded, almost imperceptibly, and rose from his seat. He moved carefully without making sudden gestures toward the door. The other bikers followed behind him, still subdued and quiet. Cena allowed them to leave without a word of anger or mockery. Once the bikers were gone, the tension in the diner lifted like a heavy weight being removed. Customers exhaled collectively, some whispering words of disbelief and admiration. Lila's legs felt weak and she had to steady herself against a table. Cena turned to her and asked gently, "Are you okay?" She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I think so. Thank you." Her hands were still shaking slightly, but the fear had begun to ebb. She realized that she had witnessed something extraordinary. Someone stepping in at the right moment, not with aggression, but with calm authority, to prevent harm. Cena gave a small, reassuring smile. "You handled yourself well too," he said. "You stayed calm and you didn't escalate anything. That matters." Lila felt a warmth of pride mixed with relief. She had faced a dangerous situation, and even though she hadn't been alone, she had played her part in staying calm and professional. The diner manager finally approached Cena, his face filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You just saved my staff and my customers." Cena shook his head lightly. "No need for thanks. Just glad everyone is safe. That's all that matters." Lila took a deep breath and looked around at the diners. Everyone seemed to be talking quietly, some still in shock, others admiring the courage that had just been displayed. She realized that moments like these didn't just protect people, they inspired them. Witnessing calm courage in the face of aggression could change the way people thought about bravery, about intervention, and about standing up for what was right. Cena stayed a little longer, making sure everyone felt safe. He moved around the diner, speaking to staff and customers briefly, offering reassurance and comfort. He made sure the manager knew that the authorities could be contacted if necessary, but he also emphasized that the immediate danger had passed. Lila felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had never imagined that someone like John Cena could be in her diner, let alone intervene in such a tense situation. Finally, Cena prepared to leave. Before stepping out the door, he turned to Lila one last time. "Remember," he said softly, "staying calm and thinking clearly matters more than fighting back. Courage isn't always about strength, it's about knowing what to do when things get dangerous." Lila nodded, tears threatening to fall. She realized that she had learned something invaluable that night. About courage, about standing up for herself, and about the power of calm intervention. Cena gave her a small nod, then walked out the door, leaving the diner in a quiet, relieved silence. As she watched him leave, Lila understood that the events of the night would stay with her forever. It wasn't just the fear she had felt or the threat she had faced. It was the lesson in courage and calmness and in the power of presence. And she knew that this night, this encounter, would shape the way she approached challenges in the future. The tension in the diner slowly began to lift as the biker and his friends finally exited the building. The sound of the door closing behind them was like a small release of pressure, and for the first time in what felt like hours, Lila allowed herself to take a deep breath. Her hands were still trembling slightly and her heart was pounding, but the immediate danger had passed. She turned her eyes toward John Cena, who was now standing calmly near the counter, surveying the diner to ensure everyone was safe. His presence was steady and reassuring, almost like a shield that had protected everyone in the room from harm. The customers were still in shock, whispering quietly to each other about what had just happened. Some were pointing toward Cena, their eyes wide with disbelief. Lila realized that she wasn't the only one amazed by the way he had handled the situation. It wasn't just his physical presence or reputation that had made the difference. It was the calm authority he had displayed, the way he had de-escalated a dangerous moment without a single act of aggression. The diner manager, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway, finally stepped forward. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to explain what just happened, but you really saved the day." Cena shook his head slightly, smiling gently. "No need for thanks. I just wanted to make sure everyone was safe," he replied. His tone was humble, almost casual, but there was an undeniable strength behind it. Lila felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had been terrified moments ago, unsure if the situation would escalate further. Now, standing there, she felt a sense of calm she hadn't expected to experience so soon. She realized that while fear had been natural, it had been temporary, and that courage, both hers and Cena's, had turned a potentially dangerous moment into something manageable. Cena walked slowly through the diner, making sure that none of the customers or staff were feeling unsafe. He stopped at several tables, speaking quietly to those who still looked shaken. "It's okay now," he said softly. "Everything is fine. You're safe." The simplicity of his words, combined with the genuine concern in his voice, had an immediate calming effect. People started to relax, realizing that the threat was truly gone. Lila moved closer to Cena, her voice barely audible. I can't believe this. You just stepped in like that. Why?" Cena smiled softly, turning to her with a look of genuine kindness. "Because no one should be hurt when they don't deserve it," he said simply. "It's not about being famous or strong. It's about doing the right thing when you can." Lila nodded slowly, her mind racing with admiration and gratitude. She had never felt such a mix of relief and awe in her life. The manager guided Lila to a small corner of the diner, offering her a chair. "Take a moment," he said gently. "You've been through a lot tonight." Lila sank into the chair, letting her hands rest on her lap. Her body still trembled slightly, but she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She realized that Cena hadn't just prevented her from being harmed. He had also shown her something important about courage, patience, and presence. Cena approached her again, crouching slightly so that he could speak at her level. "How are you feeling now?" he asked. Lila swallowed hard, trying to find the words. I'm okay, she said finally. Still shaken, but I feel safe. Cena nodded. Good, he said softly. That's what matters. You stayed calm, and that made a difference too. You didn't escalate the situation, and that helped everyone. Lila's chest swelled with a quiet pride. Even though she had felt fear, she had managed to stay composed, and Cena acknowledged that. The diner slowly began to return to its normal rhythm. Staff members cleaned up the overturned chairs and spilled drinks, while customers cautiously returned to their meals. Yet even with the noise returning, there was a sense of shared relief in the air. Everyone knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. The story of the evening was already forming in their minds, a story about courage, intervention, and the unexpected hero who had walked in at just the right moment. Cena didn't linger unnecessarily. He made sure that Lila and the manager were both comfortable and reassured, then prepared to leave. Before stepping out the door, he turned to Lila one last time. Remember this, he said gently. Courage isn't always about fighting. It's about staying calm, thinking clearly, and standing up when it matters most. You did great tonight. Lila nodded, tears threatening to spill, overwhelmed by the kindness and wisdom of someone she had only just met. As Cena walked out, Lila felt a mixture of emotions, relief, admiration, gratitude, and even inspiration. She realized that the events of that night would stay with her forever. It wasn't just about the fear she had felt or the danger she had faced. It was about witnessing how courage, calmness, and presence could completely change a situation. The manager came over and placed a reassuring hand on Lila's shoulder. You were amazing tonight, he said. I don't think anyone could have handled that better. Lila smiled weakly, feeling both exhausted and proud. She knew he meant it. She had faced a real threat and had survived it with dignity, thanks in large part to Cena's intervention, but also because she had stayed calm and professional in a very tense moment. As the night continued, Lila began to reflect on what had just happened. She realized that this experience had changed her perspective. It had shown her the importance of remaining composed under pressure, of standing up for herself, and of recognizing courage in others. Cena's actions had not only protected her, but had also set an example for everyone in the diner. People were now talking quietly about how one person's courage and presence could prevent harm and inspire others. Later, after most of the customers had left, Lila and the manager sat down for a moment to discuss the incident. They talked about what had happened, what could have gone wrong, and how grateful they were that Cena had intervened. Lila felt a sense of closure. The fear and tension had passed, replaced by a quiet understanding of what courage really meant. She knew she would carry this lesson with her for the rest of her life. Even though the evening had been frightening, it had also been empowering. Lila realized that she had witnessed firsthand how a calm, confident approach could diffuse aggression without violence. She had learned that standing up for what was right didn't always mean confrontation. It sometimes meant presence, patience, and understanding. Cena's intervention had shown her that bravery could take many forms, and that sometimes the simplest actions could have the most profound impact. The diner slowly emptied, leaving only the staff behind to clean and close for the night. Lila moved quietly around, helping with dishes and tidying tables, her mind still replaying the events. She thought about how close things had come to getting out of hand, and how one person's courage had made all the difference. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for Cena but also for the lesson she had learned about human strength and resilience. Before leaving for the night, Lila took a moment to look around the diner. The chairs were upright, the floor was clean, and the tension that had once filled the room was gone. Everything looked normal again, but she knew that the memory of this night would linger forever. She had seen fear, anger, and danger, but she had also seen courage, calmness, and intervention in their purest forms. It was a night that had tested her, but also one that had taught her invaluable lessons about life, bravery, and the power of doing the right thing. As she finally stepped out into the cool night air, Lila felt a sense of relief and closure. She knew that the events of the evening would stay with her, but she also knew that she had grown stronger because of them. And though the memory of the biker's aggression would remain, it was overshadowed by the memory of a hero who had walked into her diner and changed everything, simply by standing firm, staying calm, and doing what was right. The next morning, The diner opened as usual, but the atmosphere was different. The previous night's events were still fresh in everyone's minds, and although the diner was back to serving its regular customers, there was an unspoken awareness of what had happened. Lila arrived early as usual, but she felt a strange mix of emotions: relief that everything had ended safely, pride that she had stayed calm, and a lingering sense of awe at the courage she had witnessed. As she started her shift, the manager came over to her, handing her a cup of coffee with a small, reassuring smile. "You did really well yesterday," he said quietly. "Everyone's talking about how you handled yourself. That takes real courage." Lila smiled softly, still processing her thoughts. I just did what I could," she replied. "It was hard, but I had help. I couldn't have done it alone." Throughout the morning, customers trickled in, and some of them quietly congratulated her. They didn't just comment on the incident. They spoke about the calmness she had shown, the way she had maintained professionalism, and how she had kept herself safe under pressure. Lila realized that even though the night had been frightening, it had also given her a new sense of confidence in herself. She had seen firsthand that staying composed could make a huge difference. Later in the morning, the news of John Cena's intervention had spread online. Local news outlets had picked up the story, highlighting how a famous wrestler had stepped into a tense situation and prevented harm without any violence. Lila saw the headlines and felt a mixture of pride and disbelief. She had been there, living through the moment, and now the story was being told for the world to see. But more than that, it reminded her how one person's courage could change the outcome of a dangerous situation completely. As the day went on, Lila found herself reflecting on the events repeatedly. She thought about how the biker had seemed unstoppable at first, how fear had filled the diner, and how a single calm, confident person had been able to stop the aggression without a fight. It made her realize that courage didn't always mean physical strength. Sometimes it meant being present, being confident, and knowing how to act when things were tense. Cena's actions had taught her a lesson that she would carry for the rest of her life. The diner continued its normal rhythm, but Lila noticed subtle changes. The customers seemed more respectful, the staff more aware of supporting each other, and even Lila herself felt a new layer of resilience. She could feel a quiet pride in how she had handled the situation, and it gave her a sense of empowerment she had never experienced before. It wasn't just about surviving the danger. It was about learning something profound about human courage and kindness. Later that week, the manager called a brief staff meeting. Everyone gathered in the small back room, and he addressed the events of the previous night. "I want to make it clear," he said, "that what happened here could have been very different. But thanks to quick thinking, calm actions, and the help of someone brave, no one was hurt. I want us all to take something from this. Calmness, courage, and helping each other matter more than we sometimes realize." The staff nodded quietly, and Lila felt a sense of connection and solidarity. They had all been part of a tense moment, and together they had come through it safely. Lila also took time to talk quietly with some of the regular customers who had been there during the incident. They shared their impressions, expressing admiration for how she and the staff had handled the situation. "I don't think I could have stayed so calm," one customer admitted. "You were amazing." Lila smiled softly, realizing that witnessing courage and then having courage herself had a ripple effect. People noticed, and it inspired them too. The days that followed brought a sense of normalcy back to the diner, but the memory of that night stayed alive. Lila found herself reflecting on the lessons she had learned. That bravery doesn't always come with aggression, that calmness can prevent danger, and that a single person stepping in can make all the difference. She also thought about the biker and his friends. She realized that their behavior had been driven by frustration and perhaps poor judgment. But what mattered was that the situation had ended without violence, showing that understanding and calm intervention could truly save lives. One evening, a week after the incident, Lila was closing the diner when she received a small package. Inside was a handwritten,